Hi, I'm Danny Graff, and I'm from Milwaukee, Wisconsin. I am retired, and sadly, there's no more AP Art History in Milwaukee Public Schools at all. I always felt the 50 architectural works and the works of 250 presented a huge problem for the kids to try to see how that related to society. In essence, it really set the stage. And in my last 10 years, I decided to do architecture first and kind of introduce the whole world of art with architecture, which there's no right or wrong way to do this. You certainly don't have to do that. Um, I felt teaching architecture was like this. We went to Italy last year. My sister was hanging over the dome in Florence and she took this picture. But this kind of is my favorite picture, but it also feels like you're going to plunge over trying to teach architecture because it's so much. I usually came in, had the kids do this little project. You can look at the slides later if you need to, but you can make up any project that you want. It was a 30-minute time limit because you really don't do that many projects in AP, but I think you need to make it interesting. I showed them 2 slides first and then gave them 30 minutes to create. So I introduced modernist architecture very briefly, and I used the 2 Guggenheim museums for one modernist, the other one postmodernist. Had the kids quickly outline them either on a smart board or whatever you're doing. You could do this a number of ways. And then do mock-ups because their group had to choose which one they were going to do. You can set up the assignment a million ways. And then we would research modernism and postmodernism, maybe the kids picking pieces. I would be sure to introduce these 2 videos with Frank Gehry. They're short, sweet, pack a lot of punch. And obviously from Wisconsin, most of us know lots of things about Frank Lloyd Wright, but he would be the second person that I personally would teach and introduce a female architect, which is very unusual even today. And when I teach, I always think the kids, long after this test, they will be in a world where they're looking at visual culture, and I introduce 2 things in movies so that the kids start noticing things when they're looking around the world, when they see movies. What designer had them put this in the movie? Why was it used? What does it signify? What sort of attitudes does it create? Like this one with the villain and the girl in the dragon tattoo had this house. What kind of life might he have led? So after this initial project, which would take only a couple of days, depending on if you're on block or regular schedule, in art history, you would have to move on to comparative essays. If you were going to do architecture first, but at some point you would have to do that. Here's another sample of how to do the project. And here is if you are not doing art history, you probably want to do some architecture project that takes a little more time. So the kind of comparison that you start with, modernism, postmodernism, or whatever you start with, plays out in history over and over again. So these are some good comparisons. I usually give the kids some ways, discussion topics that will help them to get that relationship to the society. And these are the 4 topics that I believe you probably have seen for architecture with advanced placement. I did write them out here, although you probably don't need that. And I would have kids make sure kids are in each of the 4 topics or assign a topic that they start to find pieces. Religious devotion, relationship to site, the new building materials, and if I wasn't going historically, I'd have to give them building innovations and architecture and power. It would pay to do a little discussion on architecture and power. I have done a little lecture and talk on the tallest buildings and how those buildings represent the society. Why are they the tallest? Give specific examples. And when they changed from sacred to secular. I've included that little piece here, but the kids would be drawing in other works on the information. This doesn't have to be given like that, but it should be discussed. The other discussion should be about buildings that have been attacked or destroyed. And why in the world would you bother to destroy a building if it didn't mean anything? So Persepolis, the Parthenon, and the Twin Towers are good works to discuss, and works that have been repurposed. The Hagia Sophia has been repurposed again, and sacred and secular is a good discussion when that starts to switch with the tallest and most important works of art. This slide comparison form was given to me at an AP Art History class. It was from a man who taught at Alexander Hamilton, so I didn't have to change the name on the top, but includes the points for comparison. Now, comparisons, you know, your kids love comparisons, but it doesn't have to be so dry, and you don't always have to end in writing a wonderful essay with it. You can just do points. This is on the College Board site, but I found it to be the most important one for teaching this. It was from a teacher in New York. And if you get a chance to look at it, I do have it if somebody wants it. But this man used Romanesque St. Foy and the Great Stupa. And he had these 5 topics around the room, different images around the room, and the kids would physically go in groups with markers on huge pieces of paper with different color markers for each group and answer the questions or look at the comparisons. So at the end, they could talk about it, and each group had different ideas as they went around the room. And I liked that a lot, getting the kids up and out and talking to each other. So the big point here is I think it helps them to have their topics of comparison match. So if you're talking about one thing on one building, you should be talking about that on the other building. So the coloring helps that. For me, if you're talking about the interior of one, you talk about the interior of the other. So that really helps for when they're organizing their thoughts, when they're organizing essays later, when they're organizing an answer on an AP test. My comparison did not include the Great Stupa, which is a good choice, but I like always for me to do a comparison and then the kids start choosing their own. So I like to use the Romanesque Gothic because when you walk in this Romanesque church, you can really feel what it's about. So I would talk about different things and showing how the direction, giving vocabulary words, and how do you look at a building. And I would use a Gothic church and have kids in a discussion about it. And then looking at the horizontal nature of a Romanesque church and how it's so solemn, simple, and severe, because that topic will come up over and over again. The gems, the brightness versus the solemn and severe and austere nature of some artworks. So this was always easy for me to start with. And then I would let the kids work on their own essays after giving them an example. I always did that dumb rhyme. Here is the church, and here is the steeple. Open the doors and see all the people. Well, kids will go, what are you doing that for? Well, it's the discussion of what happens in sacred spaces. So if it's a church, all the people, it's made for the people inside in a group worship, in something that is taught to them weekly basis. So students will need a basic knowledge of Buddhism, Hinduism, Native American, Islamic, and Christian religions. So I put the tenets of Islam, just because one year back a while, um, there was a question, and it was about, according to the 5 tenets of Islam, what is this mosque? How does this mosque support that? And the kids several days later came back and they asked us the tenets of Islam. You didn't teach us that. And I'm like, did they really ask you that? And they didn't. A couple of kids are like, no, that's not what they asked. But kids always get that mixed up. So they didn't have to know the tenets of Islam, but what they knew about it should have been that there was prayer and a pilgrimage, and what the question was asking. The answer was orientation towards Mecca, made for individual prayer, and the symbolic nature of the art and decorations inside. But that's how sometimes kids like freak out a little bit and go, really, you need to really read that question. I have included a little piece on a little project we used to do in measuring your fingers to know the parts of the body that were in the golden proportion. So that is outlined here. I don't know that anybody else would want to do that, but it does play out in many pieces of architecture that there is geometry in it, and that there's math in it, and that it means something. The most helpful book I found was the Annotated Mona Lisa. And this book, I think you could actually teach from, but um, each architectural era was very well planned out. They also gave you charts and vocabulary, and I would take these and run off copies and cut them apart, and kids would try to put them back together. I had a lot of games that I made with that so that they would come in, do the game, and then that would start their day, so that, you know, they always had something to do and they could repeat those games. So in this book, I mean, I have the games. I left them at my school, but I really took it right out of this book, and they did a good job of comparing like Roman and Greek, Byzantine, um, early Christian, Gothic, and Romanesque, postmodern, and modern. So that was a great resource. Um, I hope there's just a couple suggestions that help you and make art history more fun. You can contact me anytime. And I do think it was always my favorite. And I personally know that you will affect kids for the rest of their lives. I have kids, these are the kids that still contact me 20 years later, that they have children, they're teachers, they're engineers. And thank you for the hard work you do. Bye.